Well, I think one of the more important things that we've certainly covered is the important development of the culture of resilience, which is that at every level, from individuals to communities, companies, and ultimately our country, needs to be increasingly able to withstand, respond, and recover to disruptive events. And those disruptions can be relatively modest ones, the kinds of bumps that we have in our daily lives, or they can be for preparing the real big ones. The key is actually they're both connected. If we're not very able to deal with the day-to-day bumps in the road, we almost always do badly when really bad things happen. And so the devil is, how do we do that? Well, it's an all-hands evolution. This is not something that the government from the top down says, we want the country to be resilient. We have to set a goal, but the actual doing of it is a bottom-up. It starts with each individual, with their families, with their neighbors, with very innovative programs like Anaheim, California, has got a Hi Neighbor program set up by the mayor. It's just knock on the door and find out who your neighbor is. This is a challenge in many urban environments where people move in and move out. But what we know is when something bad happens on scale, the first responders are almost never the professionals. They are their friends, their neighbors, their family member, perfect strangers who are nearby. The first responders almost always are second responders. They come in afterwards when dealing with a more extreme event. And this notion that as citizens, we all have a responsibility to look out for ourselves if we're able, but very much also to look for our neighbors. About roughly 1/4 of Americans are not able to help themselves in times of emergency because they're old, or they're infirm, or they're very young. And so we need a process of a buddy system almost, where we find those folks who are really in need of assistance and promise to help them out in the time of need. This actually has such a positive outcome. So while what's animating is worrying about bad things happening, the actual process of being prepared, it basically reinforces a social contract. Why do we come together in communities in the first place? Is because there are problems bigger than what we can handle all by ourselves. And so those are, I think, such important themes as we figure out how we take on this growing risk of more extreme weather, more stressful disasters. Stressful because our infrastructure is getting older and frailer in some cases. Where we live and how we live puts us at some exposure. And so by being prepared for dealing with the day-to-day a little bit better, being better neighbors, better citizens, we're ultimately going to be able to ride our way through even the worst events. While there's no question that the core building block of resilience is at the bottom level, at individuals and families and communities, a challenge we face as a society is many of our systems that we depend upon actually are managed by government or by key public-private sector players, and they have to be resilient as well. It turns out some of our poorest citizens are often most resilient at an individual level. They deal with stress on a day-to-day, unfortunately, and are very resilient. But they often live in the most fragile environments, the ones that are lowest sea level. Therefore, when the flood comes in, most likely to be the weakest housing. So when the wind blows, it breaks first. The fact is that an individual can be prepared by having their own generator, but if the gas stations have no generators, then they can't refill to get the fuel to keep their generator going. So our challenge is to get everybody involved at an individual level, but we really have to develop a conversation about the infrastructure, the systems, the communities, often beyond our traditional local boundaries, because disasters, when they hit, often have regional implications. Hurricane Sandy impacted on New Jersey, impacted on Pennsylvania, impacted on New York and Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. How do you deal with events that don't stay in tidy jurisdictions? It requires collaboration and cooperation on a much higher level to be able to deal with those challenges.